Tuesday.
Yes. It looks like Dr. Deanne is in the singing mood.
Oh, yeah.
So we are here today to talk about two sides of the same coin around service design and product design. So this one I try very hard in all of what we write to consider that, product design, service design, so that we don't exclude either one. But I've struggled for years now to see um, how you make that distinction in a lot of cases
Yeah.
when you're looking at the big picture.
Yes. Yep. Because they're I know they're different, but they're not different. It's all a part of that journey. Of course, the product design, you're really honed in on those
That
features or pieces,
micro,
that
yeah,
micro, yeah, versus
yeah.
that macro where you can get bit, on either side. So if you're not looking at that macro, what happens? You got this. I know we've talked about a million times. You've got a rock star product, the best UX. It's just a delighter, lovable product, but something else stinks. Whether it's maintaining it, whether it's an update breaking everything, whether it's you call support, and have a bad experience. It kind of ruins anything related to the product design.
That's true. And when you think about ethnography and follow me homes and any work that involves going out and watching the customer in the wild,
Yeah.
you realize that your micro experiences within your products are so they're impacted so much by those environmental components of where does that user get their data from, or what are the disruptions and distractions. And so you have to think about onboarding in that
Hmm.
case. Like you're saying, you have to look at the other side of the journey around the support.
Yes.
If someone's out in the field, for example, does your support mechanisms enable them to get what they need
Right.
in certain environments? So I mean, it's to me again very difficult to look at product without looking at services that support the product, because you've got to understand that context
Yes.
and that entire journey in order to ensure that your micro fits within your macro.
Exactly. And we've seen plenty of cases where that's actually not happening. Even, you can go back, in the journey with marketing. You have the marketing, you have the onboarding, you have the product usage, you have the maintenance, you have the support, may have professional services in there. And it's all about not only thinking about all that when you're doing that analysis, when you're doing that workflow analysis or journey mapping. It's got to be all of those things have to be part of it. And it's a messaging. Even I think about sometimes is kind of the brand, what the brand is about, and the messaging that's occurring. Is that consistent? Is your organization set up to really support system design versus excuse me, service design versus just looking at the individual system or product?
But I'm glad you said system design, because
Yeah.
when again, this is where I think my rub comes from, is being trained in systems thinking and systems
Yes.
engineering. You're constantly exploring not only the interactions with technology or products, you're looking at how a customer navigates through different aspects of the experience that might, like you said, how do I gain access to call support? How do I make sure that the labels and the terminology is consistent across everywhere from marketing all the way through to the knowledge base?
Yes.
And we've seen many instances where it's really clear that teams are working in silos because that service and product don't necessarily um, they don't fit in all cases. There are points of friction that make it clear that people are working in silos inside of those organizations.
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of the clients we work with, it starts out as a that micro product design.
Hmm.
We both are kind of system thinkers, and I think that's we come from the same background.
Same,
We're trying
same
to think that.
feeling.
So, I think we see that frequently where
Hmm.
it's, your product, yeah, we can improve. There are lots of areas for improvement, but your real problem's happening downstream, or it's a problem with inconsistencies in how you messaged the experience of the product and its purpose versus the actual usage.
Hmm.
So there are all kinds of areas where things can kind of they can break down from that. Again, think of a NPS, when you get detractors.
Right.
Where is that happening? It's not necessarily your product. And our organization structured to support kind of this service approach, that more holistic approach. Because to
Hmm.
your point, a lot of times they're not, and they don't have processes in place. Um, so yeah, it starts surfacing that you feel like you're dealing with different companies depending on if you're on the marketing site using the product or calling their support. So,
Hmm.
have you set up your organization for success? Your infrastructures, are they set up to
Hmm.
make your customers successful and happy? So, I always find it interesting, and I recently got it. As you know, I like to do 3D printing. I think this is a great example, and I'm not going to give away because it's not a shot at. So it was a disruptive technology. This one particular system that I ended up going, they were kind of first in class to offer certain features. The experience with the printer and what it does, and even its software, awesome. You get an update, you need to call support. I
Hmm.
literally said, I don't even want these features that I can't get anywhere else because even when you do an update, it seems to break something every single time. And oh, yeah, when I talk to support, never getting either not getting the support or not getting consistent messaging or instruction with that support. So, again, my experience has been you gave me an NPS and I were rating the printer and the technology itself, I'd probably go 9, but I'm not going to. I'd probably be hitting right at 5. This
Hmm. A detractor.
all this, and it's around that full
Yeah, that full
service
experience.
experience.
Yeah.
So again, product design, they were obviously very, very focused on that.
Hmm.
And anything else, their knowledge base, their updates, how that fit in with the experience was secondary.
The
And
second.
I feel it.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a good example as we've talked about it.
Yeah.
I've been experiencing it, and it's like, I've got this great technology that I can't find anywhere. I can't have anywhere else.
Interesting.
But anyhow,
Interesting. I remember a project years ago focused on looking at a customer service organization and identifying the capabilities or features that needed to be consolidated into one new system because the functionality data was lived in more than a dozen systems. And in doing that work, to understand what that system needs to include, that new unified single system, there was information that surfaced around the fact that there was a high turnover rate due to the fact that the reps were not trained effectively, nor did they feel that they were supported in their ability to provide good customer service.
yep.
There was a need to look at other incentives that allowed them to more effectively serve the customer.
Hmm.
So, how do they not only solve the problem the customer is calling in about, but how do they find other opportunities? And the current systems did not support that. And so, in the process of, again, we were brought in to look at the product alone and how do they create that product, there was a lot that came out of that work that dealt with how they handle the actual engagement with a customer from end to end that didn't deal with that product experience. And
Right.
so um, it was really difficult to balance how much of the feedback or how deep do we go into that exploration around the services and not the product. And then when at the end of the day, in the information we did deliver, some of it wasn't consumed because it wasn't in scope around the deliverables or what that team had planned in terms of changes to their workflow.
Right.
And
So
so it was a catch 22 in that we all recognized that there are aspects of that service that they were providing that needed to be addressed, but unfortunately they just wanted to focus on the product.
right. And I would question, and I'm not familiar with this case, but is it because of the organization structure, like again, working in
Mhm.
silos? So, okay, now what do we do with this
Correct.
information? And you have to, as an organization, your leadership does have to focus on that
Hmm.
service design approach. Have
Hmm.
those teams working together. Make sure they're think of Apple. I think in the newsletter we use that. They're like that's the ultimate like them, hate them, whatever. Their experience that macro level is kind of what sets them apart, right? It doesn't matter if I'm being onboarded or I've got an update or I've got another product. It's like that. It just seamlessly happens,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
they've paid so much attention to that macro level journey, taking that holistic approach. So,
Well, you have to also think about when you are designing capabilities and features within the product, and you touched on this earlier. Some of those take you somewhere outside of the product, potentially take you somewhere outside of the product, and require you to interact with the company. And if there was not thoughtful planning and also focus on how does that experience work, what does it look like, and can the user get back to what they were doing essentially, then what you've done is going back to your MPS rating, like you failed in terms of getting a promoter because you only focused on the feature set. And this is again where I think that in your UX organization, you've got to have individuals that don't make a distinction between product and service, but they are systems thinkers that are looking at the
yeah,
holistic big picture. Because if you're just focused on product and you're just focused on service,
yep,
you're still in that situation where that big picture or that systems thinking may not be a part of or in your wheelhouse.
yep, yeah. And I think a lot of people get overwhelmed, thinking at that level, that macro level. We have
Mhm.
our day to day responsibilities on any team you live on, and I do think it becomes okay. Now what? What do we do? So I heard Kenya and Deanne. So now what do we do? Look, well,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know what your experiences have been in that, but I mean, a good start is just finding representatives from all those silos and then hitting the board, hitting an all day
That's
workshop.
right. Map it out.
Do that mapping with the right
That's right.
people in there so you're not making assumptions as someone who only works on product,
Correct.
about the service or support organization. But I don't know about you, but that's kind of always my start. Let's get in a
Yeah.
room together and let's start mapping it out. If we
Yeah.
need to validate some of that, we'll do it. But where, how are we playing together? How are the different pieces playing together?
Yeah. And so when we think about the return to work model and how, people have complained, and this is totally off topic, but people have complained about, oh, I went back in the office and all I did was sit in a cubicle or at a desk on Zoom.
Yeah,
Bring your teams back together to do that end-to-end work and map out that journey and look at where you have services incorporated versus where you have different touch points with your products. and use post-it notes. Put those post-it notes at those different
Those
locations within that journey. And now you have a map of the end to end, but also where your product comes in. Now you can dig into where within the product, what does that experience look like? How does the user get in and out of the product or that particular service? Where does it end?
Yes.
And get you to the next step. And I think when organizations take the time to bring everyone together to do that, you start to see perspectives that there are things that I, in my silo, know that you don't.
Yeah.
Now we're able to have those cross sharing opportunities and conversations about how we both have opportunities for improvement.
Yeah.
How we then can inform our roadmap more effectively. And that roadmap is not just product, it's also service related. And that's what you miss if you continually just have things siloed around one versus
Yeah.
the other.
Yep. And you often think, what you understand. A lot of product managers too may think they understand. Okay, I kind of get what support's got to deal with and what they might have
Mhm.
to do. But do you? Do you know the challenges firsthand? Do you, how is whatever you're doing on the product land or marketing land, how's that
Mhm.
impacting them downstream? So I think it's also a way of to bring awareness, like what all the resources and pain points all those siloed organizations are dealing with or have to account for that
Yes.
any given little team might not be aware of or may be making some really incorrect assumptions, which I think we see all the time
Yes.
front. Yeah.
And when you think about improving your services, improving your products, you're triangulating your customer's experience with the perspectives of your internal teams who own those products and services with your business operations,
Goals, right.
your
And
business
operations.
goals and operations. You've got to triangulate all three. That's why they're two sides of the same coin. Because whenever we finish out a project, we recognize that we delivered wireframes, we delivered requirements or strategy input, strategic inputs. But what also comes out of those findings are different ways to look at how you're delivering value outside of the product that relate to services, that relate to
Yeah.
how you share awareness around those services within the applications and that sort of thing. And so it always comes out in the work that we do that you've got to look at all of those things in tandem or together and then break up kind of how you make sense of that feedback and that input.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. And we get a lot back to the whole your organization needs the support structure, infrastructure, resources to do this. uh, you got to make sure that happens. So I know another real quick example was a big website we worked on, and it turned out, even though it appeared as one single entertainment
Yes.
experience, well, heck, it turned out there were 20 different organizations working
Mhm.
on this one
Mhm.
experience. From a user's perspective, it was one organization,
Mhm.
one product, we'll call it. But it was very, very choppy because no one was talking. The right hand wasn't talking to the left hand. It was just, and you have to make that happen. You have to somehow get processes in place. And I
Mhm.
think that is the challenge. And that is, in my opinion, one of the toughest parts is how do we structure, how do we add processes that will lend itself
Mhm.
to bring this macro level knowledge to the table and take that high level look at everything before we
Mhm.
dive deep. So
I can tell
that's
you how you have to have a facilitated conversation, and the person facilitating that conversation either has to be someone from outside your organization, like one of us, or you have someone in your organization who's in a role where they are not wed to or committed to the outcomes of any one particular aspect of your organization, and they can be objective
yes,
because it takes a lot of objectivity And I can't be responsible for the P&L or the design of one component of this entire ecosystem. And, to think that I'm trying to facilitate that conversation objectively and without bias,
Mhm.
it's difficult. It's difficult.
And we've all been on the teams where it's like, oh
Correct.
man, what is marketing talking about? Or why
Right.
do I have to deal with them? Or what, and
Mhm.
poor support. Somehow they tend to kind of be so downstream they
Mhm.
just don't have the input when it's one of the things that most significantly impacts your customer's experience in
Mhm.
many cases. So yeah, you're right. You need that person with maybe some authority or definitely the
Mhm.
objective view of things to start getting these teams working together. And I have found that even if you have some pushback, initially, like product teams don't want to work with marketing, or marketing doesn't want to work with support, or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
I've always seen when they get in a room together and everyone feels heard and they're really uncovering all these things that maybe you've had a product out there for 10 years and never knew, that it brings a real cohesion and sense of empowerment
Mhm.
to all of those teams too. So that's another bonus that comes out of that. People, Kenya, how many people, when we talk to support, how eager they are to talk
Yes.
and like someone is listening to me. I mean, anyway, so you're going to do a lot for your that kind of that internal morale in
Mhm.
addition to building your brand with a clear, consistent,
Mhm.
seamless experience, and that becomes your brand. Okay, go back to Apple. It is your brand. It's not just about a product.
Yeah, we didn't touch on it. We have a few minutes left. So if you have any questions, please send them over. But what we didn't touch on is service design that includes physical spaces where you do not create the product, but you have to make decisions on what product to put into your service-oriented environment,
Mhm.
how to configure that product. Does that product even fit within that service organization or the service you're providing? It's the same, it's really the same thing. It's just
Same
that
thing.
you have a certain level of over decision making, but you can't change the product because you
Right.
don't own that product. But it does in a lot of ways relate to those services like support, where you're navigating through physical spaces and you have to think about how does someone work with your team and your environment, and then where do you introduce products to help supplement that experience. What do those products do in terms of delivering value or solving for your customer or user in that context? So you have to ask yourself the same questions.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, it's very important again that you have that ownership around the macro level. And I almost feel like physical service environments are more likely to have someone who's more objective,
Mhm.
who's more
Mhm.
capable of looking at the bigger picture, because it's not within a digital realm, and it's not about it's not about a focus on the product that is monetized
Right.
within that organization. So there's more focus on ensuring that your service considers the ecosystem,
Yep.
and the products just happen to live in that ecosystem,
Yes.
versus your product organization and your services support the product.
Yes. Exactly. And
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So if you were to think about the 1 to 2 takeaways that you would provide to someone listening, what would you say are your takeaways?
Um, Consider everything. So start thinking like start developing that system services thinking that services on say in that level of knowledge and empathy for that full journey,
Mhm.
and get in the room. That, I mean, really get someone, even if it's for a 1 day workshop, a 2 day
Mhm.
workshop, and really start putting that journey, that holistic journey together. And that's a start, because if nothing else, it'll make you aware of all the components. It'll
Mhm.
make you aware of maybe pain points from those different perspectives. And then your, you can start thinking about what your service or product or brand is, and
Mhm.
how do we start addressing in a seamless way those pain points, or supporting each of those pieces.
Yeah, you took my answers. So if I could add on to that, I would say that when you look at mapping things out and identifying where and how and that sort of thing, that you look for those points of friction. So
Yes.
you call out those areas where there's a gray area, there is some complexity, things are not working today. Calling those areas out and then going up to the next level of brainstorming and
Yeah.
solutioning to figure out how do you optimize or improve those things. And part of you got scrambled up a little bit, but I do think I heard you say something around the fact that you want to use someone skilled at facilitation, and that if it's not someone within your organization that's objective, that you find someone that can be objective and kind of go from the 50,000 foot view down to the 5,000 foot view, and being able to kind of go up and down based on where the conversation is and what aspect of defining and solutioning you as an organization are at in that effort. So I love that. Yeah, I love it. So thank you so much again for joining us today. If you have any questions for us, please reach out. We're here. We have the knowledge. We are ready to answer your questions. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
Yeah. Bye.